Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be invited to the International Congress of the Western Amazon. And I really wish I was visiting there, this exciting place and region. But I guess this time has to be through a virtual means of communication. So I've been invited to talk about the opportunities and challenges for the growth of milk production from pasture, which are very interested in our region, and I hope we can discuss with all of you after this talk. So just a very brief introduction to Uruguay. Uruguay has a size, is 15% higher in terms of surface than the state of Acre, and produces around 2 million tons of milk with 3,900 farmers, dairy farmers, about 440,000 cows. Most of them are American Holstein-based genetics, and 760,000 hectares are dedicated to dairy. So the average farm would have around 150 cows and 250 hectares, although there is a range of large farms of more than 1,000 cows and very small farms of 20 to 30 cows. So in a sense, this is not a large producer of milk, Uruguay, right? This is the Latin American dairy producers, the 13 most important, and you see that Brazil is the highest producer with 33,000 33 million tons of milk, and then Uruguay in the 5th position. So it's not a large producer, but it has an impact on the world dairy market because of the exports, because it's one of the 7 countries or regions that has surplus milk. This is Uruguay produces more milk than what the population can consume. So you see in this group, it is New Zealand, Australia, the European Union, the States, United States, Argentina, and Uruguay. So in this way, it is an important player in the world market of milk. So what happened to Uruguay in the last few years? So in about 35 years, production has increased very rapidly. This is similar to what New Zealand had achieved in terms of growth, annual growth, and its productivity also has increased at a similar rate, a similar pace. So you see, even though it's a slow productivity, still it's about 3,000 liters per hectare per year, average of the whole country. What has been impressive is its growth within this period. So how was this growth constructed? It has been part of its stocking rate, which is this gray line, which has been 1.6 times in this 35-year period, and the production per cow has been 2.6 fold over this period. So it has been more based on production per cow than stocking rate. So this makes a 3.5 increase in productivity in this period of time. So when we look at this period and especially thinking on the future, which is what we are interested in now, we want to see what happened with the feed consumption. And when we look at the representative group of farms, we see that throughout this period, if we divide the grazed feed, the conserved forage, and the concentrates, which are imported, we see that the grazed feed hasn't increased within this period. So if we consider the conserved feed, the conserved forage, this has shown a slight increase of 24%, but clearly that productivity increase hasn't been based on this. So what we see it has explained a lot has been this massive increase in concentrate use per hectare with 311%. So is this the intensification pathway we want for the future? With about 5 tons of forage, is that our ceiling? Is that all we can do in terms of homegrown forage consumption? So when we look at data from satellite images, we see that average of 5 years. This is a very comprehensive work that has been done by the cooperative CONAPRODE. It shows in all regions above 10 tons of pasture production, and this is in commercial farms. If we look at Argentina, a nearby region in similar latitude, also studies in farmlets are showing 9 to 12 tons in dryland. So clearly there is a higher potential for pasture production. And looking at the business, we have concerns of how competitive we are in the use of capital. And if we look at the capital distribution, if we take how many dollars of investment we have per cow, so it's about $1,000, rough figures, $1,000 of investment in genetics, or how much one cow is worth, about $2,000 in infrastructure, feeding and milking infrastructure, but there's about $5,000 in average farms in terms of investment of land. So clearly we had to be more competitive in the use of this asset. So being land our most important asset in our capital, we're interested in the evolution of its price. And if we look at Uruguay, in the last 15 years, the price of land has increased 8 times. So we need to be more competitive in the use of land if we want to be profitable. So a way to look at competitiveness in the use of land is productivity. And in this way, we compare Uruguay to the competitors, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and Netherlands as representative of Europe and the United States. We see that productivity has been very much lower in Argentina and Uruguay compared to the other countries. This is from IFCN information. From the same sources, we look at another way of looking at competitiveness, which is the use of land in terms of herbage intake or pasture, homegrown forage intake. And in this way, also Uruguay is way below their competitors. So Argentina is slightly above those, but still way behind most of Oceania and European countries. In terms of production costs, this is where our region stands out, and Uruguay and Argentina both are below their competitors, which achieve very high costs of production, particularly in Europe, where price is subsidized in most countries, or has been in the past. In terms of efficiency, this is the range of differences is a bit lower, but it's not so much below the competitors in Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, or Ireland in Europe, slightly below Netherlands and United States. And another way of looking at competitiveness is labor productivity. So how many liters of milk we can get out of each hour of work or labor in the primary sector, so in production. And in this way also the competitiveness is low, or both in Uruguay and Argentina compared to most of the competitors. So the challenges from now, looking at the future, is how to deal with the growth. And some of the key aspects, if we look at Uruguay in particular, of the growth of farmers, show us some challenges. This is a way of looking at that growth in relation to the infrastructure for milking. So the cows per milking unit is an indicator of the dimension of the milking system, how well it fits the number of cows. So these 5 groups are groups of farms according to their growth in the past. The one in the left is the one that grew the least, the 20% that grew the least. And you see those have they are small farms with 25 cows and about less than 2 hours of milking. They have 7 cows per milking unit. Whereas in the far right, we see the cows, the farms that grew the most. They have 240 cows now, and they have long milkings, 4 hours. That's because they have 26 cows per each milking unit. A reference for this is what New Zealand Dairy NZ targets. It was about 10 cows per milking unit as a comfort zone for farmers to have fast milkings, which help they have a more comfortable lifestyle having short milkings. But there is another qualitative way to look at these issues, and it's looking at who's at the farms now, who's milking, who's owning the farm, who's managing the farms. And in Uruguay in particular, you see that farmers are in this range of average age, which is 54 years old, which they are baby boomers or Generation X, whereas employees are within the millennials or Generation Y and Z and 37 years old. So there is a clash of the way they look at the world, and this has to be taken into account when farms grow. Another important factor in this growth is how it's financed. And in this way, we see that Argentina and Uruguay, they have much less debt than most of their competitors. So in terms of competitiveness, a summary, we can say that Uruguay and probably Argentina also are sharing most of this summary. But Uruguay has low production cost and low levels of debt. They are in average levels in terms of per cow production, efficiency of dry conversion, and profitability and risk, which is figures I haven't shown. But they have a very large margin for growth in terms of heavy intake per hectare, productivity per hectare, stocking rate, and labor productivity. So with this analysis of competitiveness, we have seen factors that affect the sustainability of dairy farm systems in terms of thinking about the future, in terms of economic and social aspects, but we still don't know much about the environmental sustainability of these systems. And why do we worry about that? Well, in one aspect is a chance of nutrient balance, and a similar pattern appears for nitrogen than for phosphorus, but I show you here the example for nitrogen. So what this graph is showing for 10 different countries for farm system studies, as you increase the input of nitrogen in the system, both in concentrates and in fertilizer, then this is a linear increase in surplus nitrogen. So this will be between 15 and 20% of the nitrogen that enters the farm is converted into milk and exported, but the other 85 to 80% stays in the farm. So the good news is that for Uruguay and Argentina, there's still low levels of nitrogen input per hectare, but as well as we intensify, increase stocking rate and production per hectare, there's no way around increasing more surplus nitrogen, and we had to be aware of that. And why do we worry about that in Uruguay? Mainly because it's a very fragile environment. If we see that all the country is crisscrossed by this watershed of creeks and streams, and a very slopy country, so runoff and erosion are very permanent issues, and also most of the drinking water is taken from those watersheds. If adding to that, also Uruguay, that exports most of the agricultural products, when in dairy we said it's 70%, is trying to show the world that it's a natural environment and they produce natural products. So this can be damaged or challenged by issues like some of the ones have happened in some years ago, years that have burst of pollution, and well, this is what farmers need to be aware of and manage to reduce the effects of farming in especially watersheds. So what are the main challenges for the farm systems in Uruguay in terms of growth? Well, we think that growth will be limited by the most limiting factor. So the shortest wood plank here, it will be the one limited that growth. And currently, it's probably the infrastructure, the one that is limiting the most. We're talking about alley, also walking alleys for cows, milking parlors that are undersized, as we said, providing shade for cows, providing water supply, and this is affecting the growth of farmers and limiting, and also that is affecting also this financial support needed for that, and it's affecting the environment because farms will not be prepared for this growth and will have effects on the environment. We're talking about effluent management systems, and also animal welfare, because cows will have to spend more time if they grow in conditions that they are not comfortable for them. But also it's affecting lifestyle, labor, and in turn will affect succession planning and access to technology and education if farms are not adequate for the growth. So up to now, we talked about what has been happening in Uruguay and how is it looking into the future. Well, now we will talk about what we're doing about it, what do we do in terms of research. And what do we do in research is based on the discussions and the priorities of these guys, the farmers and advisors, which are our stakeholders. So what they said for us in 2016 is these three top priorities for research. The first one is increasing homegrown forage per hectare with low cost of milk solids, systems to achieve that. And then the second one, which was surprising for us, is that it was a common question of how to make dairy more attractive to people, and in particular the new generations of both farmers and employees. And the third one is how to continue to grow in income and efficiency, but caring for environment, particularly land and water. So this is how we work. We have three lines of research, the ones I mentioned. We do a lot of research in our research dairy farm, which is has to be performing at the level of the top 25% farmers. And we have for each line of research a steering committee of advisors, researchers, and farmers, which also help as reference farms. So this is an example of one of our steering committees where there was 8 farmers, 5 advisors, and 2 research, and this particular steering committee has already met 13 times in 3 years and have actively designed and monitored one of our key projects, the Project 10,000. So with these guys, we discussed, so we want to increase forage per hectare, but how should we go about it? And starting from this analysis of the commercial farms, we saw that as farms increase the harvest, sorry for the Spanish there, but this is the harvest of pasture and reserves. So as they increase homegrown forage harvest, the margin, the economic margin increased, but there's a high dispersion. So the only thing that's clear is that there's no way, there's no farms here, there's no farms with high margin but low forage harvest. And for that, you need a high stocking rate. So to increase forage per hectare, we need to have strategy, have a feeding strategy. And in this way, we found that there's 2 contrasting strategies, both in the world and in Uruguay within farmers. The first one is looking at the cow, and from that perspective, formulate a diet or a ration on combined grazing, research and supplementation. And the other one is to start looking at the pasture, its growth, and monitor it, and from there design the diet of grazing, research and supplementation. So looking at this, we found that we needed to the protocols for defining, formulating rations were pretty clear, but there was not a clear protocol for grazing management, so we decided to work on one. We defined a grazing management system or protocol called less than solid, the 3 R's for grazing, for the feeding strategy based on grazing, that comprises 3 steps. The first one is a weekly farm walk, recording biomass and phenology. The second step is adjusting a rotation length according to the growth rate of the pasture and stock that we monitored before. This means defining how much area we're going to give each day for the cows. And the third step was defining what is the target of post-grazing residuals that we want for the cows throughout the year. So we defined that, we published that, we agreed on that protocol before going into research. This system, or the principles of this system, had been used in the past, and even in Australia within my thesis, we shown that we could achieve a harvest of 22 tons of dry matter per hectare of kikuyu plus ryegrass based on this type of management. So over that basis, we designed with this group of farmers and advisors the project 10,000. What does it stand for? It stands for the productivity target that we set, which was achieving 10 tons of homegrown feed per hectare per year, and also achieving at least 1,000 kilos of milk solids per hectare per year. So we wanted to achieve these 2 targets, but with 4 different strategies. The 4 different strategies were combining 2 different feeding strategies. The first one was a fixed grass one with a stable diet of 1/3 of the diet as grass. Was fixed throughout the year, and another feeding strategy was called max grass, which had a flexible allocation of grass according to growth. And we combined those 2 with 2 different genotypes. The North American Holstein genotype, which is the most predominant in Uruguay, and the New Zealand Holstein genotype, which we were testing because of our interest on their adaptation to grazing and their proportion of milk solids in production, although we expected less milk production in terms of liters. So with those 2, we appeared with a 2x2 combination and 4 farmlets. For those farmlets, we wanted to study different aspects, both the biophysical, the feeding systems, the grazing management aspects, and there's different postgraduate studies there in pasture monitoring, the nutrition, the animal welfare, milk quality, and human well-being. So this is an ongoing study. We finished the 3rd year now, and this is how it's looking on farm. So these cows had 10 paddocks each, and they work as a contained system. The 30 cows only graze those 10 paddocks. Here we see the 4 groups of 10 cows, each on their own paddocks, and they all have the basic infrastructure of laneways, water in the paddock, and also feed pads. So feed pads for those cows, there were this basic system with also a low-fin area for the cows to rest, and some shade, which is not shown in this picture. And the same infrastructure was available for the 4 systems. So preliminary results of these 4 systems in years 1 and 2. The 3rd year we haven't finished the analysis of results, but they showed us the figures of these 2 years, that in terms of this target of 10,000, most of them surpassed that target of 10,000 kilos dry matter per hectare per year. it was close, this North American Holstein grass max system was a bit lower. And in terms of milk solids per hectare per year, they were all above 1,300 kilos of solids per hectare per year, with a bit higher yield in terms of the New Zealand cows on grass max. So this is how it looked, that forage that they harvested. This is the target of 10,000 kilos of forage per hectare per year. I mean, this is a combination of graze and conserved. So the green bars are the graze portion of the forage. The gray areas is the conserved pasture itself, and the orange ones are showing the conserved crops. So this is maize silage, all of that. So, but farmers care about money, and that's why we undertook an analysis of economic performance with a team of the industry board of INALE, and they did a modeling based on a high scale cow. I mean, it's a herd, sorry, 130 cow farm, taking a comparison from an average farm that was already analyzed. And it shows first the operating profit of these systems. And we see that even though the net income of the farmers was more than 3 times higher for all of the options, also the total cost was more than 3 times higher, or close to 3 times higher in most of the options, although a bit lower the cost was in this grass max system. So the operating profit showed in all of them more than 3 times higher, but it had a particular advantage in the grass max systems, and in particular with the New Zealand Holstein cow. The cost reduction was about between 15 and 18%. So the farm that showed the highest cost reduction was grass max New Zealand. And an interesting analysis was done in terms of risk analysis. They did a stochastic analysis looking at the price risk of concentrates and milk, and also the climate risk, looking at 100 years of different rainfall. And so doing 1,000 iterations, so 1,000 samples of that result, they came with the result that every 2 years the average farm will have an operating profit lower than $200, but these two systems will have an operating profit lower than $200 only every 15 years. But compared to that, the risk was much lower in these grass max systems, where that low operating profit was never achieved in this case, and the other one was achieved only every 250 years. So the grass max options were clearly a lower risk options. And changing continents here, but always trying to look at the impact of forage in economic performance and stability. I just quickly show you here what happened in Australia. Part of my PhD thesis, we showed here what happens with the impact of irrigation on the utilization of forage. And here what was interesting, that when we include irrigation, all these results are showing the forage utilization of systems with 450 millimeters of irrigation. And what you can see is that this complementary forage rotation, which includes maize, brassica, forage rape, and Persian clover, in all the 3 of them in 1 year, show because of the high water use efficiency, they show that even though you have low rainfall, you always achieve above 30 tons of dry matter per hectare per year. So with irrigation, these type of cropping systems are stable, and the pasture systems with irrigation, they were less water use efficient. So in the low irrigation years, they will have lower forage yields. And what happens or what we think about the potential of forage production and utilization in Latin America and the Caribbean. So this is a very global way of looking at it, but it's quite impressive that when FAO makes this kind of images about net primary production of biomass, the primary production biomass potential is concentrated within the tropics, actually where you guys are now, and clearly there's a massive potential for increase of forage biomass and sustainably or efficiently converted into feed and protein eventually. So to work on these possibilities in Latin America, we have been part of an international project of Fontagro, which looks at different strategies to sustainable and intensify dairy in Latin America and the Caribbean. In this case, there are 11 countries from Dominican Republic, Honduras, up to Chile and Argentina and Uruguay. In this case, we are looking at a farm in Costa Rica. So clearly, the common pattern that we've seen in this project, as most countries have a high margin for growth in terms of productivity, if in terms of home run forage utilization. And a new recent project that we are undertaking now, also in Fontagro, based on that initial project, is one that looks particularly into pasture management and particularly into grazing management, using software for grazing management decision making. So we looked at the research on terms of economical, biophysical aspects, but we also need to look at the research, do research, and we'll show you a little bit of that in terms of the environment as we were concerned. So one of the studies in this way in Estanzuela is looking at the phosphorus and nitrogen runoff in dairy. So we want to quantify how much phosphorus and nitrogen is enough. This is an overview of the dairy farms with the different grazing paddocks. So in one of the grazing paddocks, we compare with only grazing and with grazing plus synthetic or organic fertilizing, what is the runoff of phosphorus and nitrogen throughout the year. And also another way of looking at this is having the big picture in the experimental farms. It's a network of nutrient balances that are being undertaken in 5 different experimental farms as a proof of concept for analyzing nutrient balances then in commercial farms. So in terms of environment and economic sustainability, and in terms of social sustainability, which is probably one of the most challenging aspects of this, the future of dairying in our region, is the social. And in that way, given that farmers and advisors put us the priority to work on that, we have developed a strategic line. We have developed a strategic line in automatic milking systems and installed the first milking robot in Uruguay 3 years ago, with the objective to adapt these systems to pasture-based conditions of Uruguay, which are different to pasture-based conditions in other temperate regions like New Zealand, Australia, or UK, because Uruguay has a hot summer compared to those regions. And in these voluntary milking systems where cows have to voluntarily flow around the farm, this different environment could affect the performance of the farms, and it needed to be studied in this region. In terms of adoption objective, we wanted to see if farmers could achieve with these systems an 8 to 5 job to make the work more attractive for employees, but also for farmers and their next generation. So what are the key adoption drivers? Well, the lifestyle potential comfort that we say, and also high productivity, as farms see this option as a way to achieve more than 2 milkings per day, and also the automation that we can achieve around the farm, getting much more data from each cow every milking and every hour, with the sensoring data that comes with these systems. In terms of challenges for these systems, the investment is still one of them. As it's a big investment if we do it right and we put all the infrastructure in place, all the smart gates, and apart from the robots. The challenge to adapt and see how they adapt to this region, this closer to tropical region, and the trade-off of cows how many cows can we have per robot, and how many milk we can get from each cow. It is a trade-off that we still don't know how we will work, in particular in our country. So finally, the research we are doing or starting to do in these robotic farms has to do with the transition of cows from a conventional farm to a robotic one, and there's a PhD there on behavior and temperament. The heat stress mitigation effect, as I said, is key in the latitude of Uruguay, and probably will be even more in higher latitudes. The farm system strategy, there's in the pipeline, there's a project that will look at 2 different contrasting strategies to maximize the milk per robot, and also one of the most innovative projects that we have around this is the work with anthropologists in understanding the people's relationship with technology, and they go beyond the farm gate, working with the communities and with the different approach. They are also working with new generations, with kids in the high schools, and studying how they look into dairy, and that's one of a very exciting project around this area. So to finalize, 9 concluding remarks about the growth of milk production from pasture in the case of Uruguay. First, it's clear that there is a highly dynamic sector that has been dynamic in the past and has to be dynamic in the future if it wants to keep growing. That the competitiveness of Uruguay systems has been based on low cost of production, but the low productivity of land, we've seen homegrown forage still very low, and labor productivity still are threatened if we don't make a change there. There is increases in productivity. The farmers that increase productivity have increased competitiveness, and there is again questions about how can they keep increasing competitivity in the future. And there's clearly no more land available, and we don't want to take any more land from the environment. So to be more profitable, the only way around is to sustainably improve the use of forage per hectare. In that way, there is a low use of pasture in the region. We've shown the potentials both in terms of imaging, satellite imaging, in terms of what you can achieve, what we showed you can achieve in farm system studies. So there's an opportunity there, and probably for many countries in the region. Stocking rate is the only way to increase forage harvest, but there's only if you increase stocking rate and you don't adjust grazing management, you probably will have increase the problem. So yes, stocking rate, but only with adjust grazing management. Pastoral systems still the basis for a competitive export sector that works without subsidies, and we always need to remind ourselves of that and not copy other countries that increase productivity but have subsidies. And environmental awareness and regulations are not a matter of interest are actually here. We need to be very responsible about how do we produce, how do we relate to the rest of society, and how do you care about for our land and for our water. So last but not least, we have clear now that the growth of the dairy industry, it's only with the people in it. So for us researchers, we need to be very aware that if we research on different ways to increase productivity and efficiency, has to be with designs and technology that can be attractive for people, and particularly ones that can attract the best, the most capable, and for them to be sustainably remain in the industry, it has to be with farms that are attractive to work in. So I thank you very much for your time, and I'm hoping to answer your questions if you have. Thank you.